This is Russia, and in late July of 1914, they joined World War I. Russia had a lot going on. Joining this war was a pretty bad move, as peasants and workers were very dissatisfied with the imperialist regime and rebelled against the government. So then Russia leaves the war, and the throne is abdicated. And so the throne was abdicated, and the Soviet Communist Party takes control under Vladimir Lenin. That Soviet Communist part is pretty important. Anyway, Russia becomes the USSR. Now, America did not really like this, as they were in the Great Depression following World War I and needed a capitalist, open trade policy to rebuild the economy. So to spite Russia, they didn't diplomatically recognize the USSR until 1933. So now Russia is out of World War I, and both World War I and World War II have just ended. America is a little upset that Russia dipped from the war, but whatever. Now America was focusing on strengthening newly independent Eastern and Central European governments. The USSR didn't really listen to America, and they ended up wanting to grow their population and power to spread communism. So in countries like Poland, where Russian influence was strong, but the West wanted Poland to be an independent representative government, distrust began to grow. So in 1946, Stalin declared that international peace was impossible under the present capitalist development of the world economy. Once Germany was defeated in World War II, it and its capital Berlin was split into 4 sections: French, British, American, and Soviet. Most importantly is the creation of West and East Berlin. The US also enforced the Truman Doctrine, which focused on military aid that would protect democratic countries from invasion, and also the Marshall Plan, which would strengthen Europe by sending resources and goods. This was America's way of bribing countries to avoid communism. Needless to say, the USSR did not like this, and built the Berlin Wall that surrounds all of Berlin. America responded by airlifting resources and materials to the American and European areas of Berlin. This was a pretty big deal. US, French, and British planes nearly delivered 2,250,000 tons of goods, including food and coal. After 277,264 flights, Stalin lifted the blockade 231 days in. Both the US and the USSR competed in the arms and space race. The arms race was about who could get the most powerful atomic weapons the fastest, while the space race was a race on who could get to space first. Debates on who quote-unquote won the space race are still undecided. The USSR was the first to gain spaceflight capabilities, while the US was the first to put someone on the moon. I guess it all depends on your definition of space race to begin with. In addition to the arms and space race, 2 major alliances were formed. North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO, is a Western European-US alliance that states that an attack against one was to be considered an attack against all, to be met by appropriate force. The USSR and its communist neighbors then formed an alliance in response to the formation of NATO called the Warsaw Pact. Tensions were extremely high. Both the US and the USSR did not want to fight directly, so instead they fought wars on foreign territory like Korea and Vietnam. So I hope you're aware, but in case someone doesn't know, Cuba is very close to the US, like just over 400 miles from Florida's coasts. So when Cuba fell to communism under Fidel Castro, the US started freaking out. It came up with a plan and invaded Cuba in the Bay of Pigs. This invasion seriously failed, and the USSR was obviously happy to have another communist country in the Western Hemisphere. To protect Cuba, the USSR sent missiles. A lot of missiles. This is known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, and was probably the peak tensions of the Cold War. People started building bomb shelters, protesting wars, and practicing bomb drills in schools. The US government realized that the tensions between the USSR was not worth it. And so the USSR agreed to take its missiles out of Cuba if Americans moved the missiles away from USSR territory. To avoid any further miscommunications, the Moscow-Washington hotline was created, encouraging easy communication between global superpowers to prevent nuclear war. This wasn't an actual physical hotline, but rather a step towards more effective communication. Shortly after this, the Berlin Wall was removed in 1990, and in 1991, the USSR broke apart into Russia and additional countries.